So the first thing we're going to do today is to talk about our poems in set 2. So in order to do that, I'm going to put you in some breakout groups. I'm going to pause our... Why would the author be interested in making this person seem foreign and incomprehensible? And maybe somebody where when you read about them you feel intimidated by the language. Why would she be interested in doing that?
Because I guess she wanted to show that a lot of people are scared of him.
Yeah, and she wants to show that he's trying to be this intimidating person who's above everybody else, but she's doing something really subversive here. What is she doing when she writes this? It's brilliant. It's brilliantly subversive. She's trying to make him seem above it all by dropping all these names and fancy things that he knows about. But what's she doing?
She's making him look bad.
Well, yeah, but she's also making herself look great because she knows about all of them. It's so subversive, it's fantastic. She's sitting here dropping all the names for him, which means she knows all the same things and the same restaurants and the same fancy scotch, right? Oh, I love that about her. And she doesn't explain that straight out, but it's really kind of fun. And I want you to keep your eye on this for when our narrators switch back and forth between a narrator who speaks very articulately with a very big vocabulary, and then later in our stories, characters who speak in a very day-to-day dialect. In today's language, we might call it code switching. Does anybody know what that means? No? Code switching is when someone speaks one way around their friends and family and then speak more properly in school or in a business context, and you code switch back and forth. Right? Is anybody ever... Now, does it ring a bell? Okay. Is anybody really good at it? It's funny to watch people who are good at it because you can... I don't know. I was watching some cheesy show the other night when I was grading. I had it on in the background. I take little breaks when I'm grading so I don't get annoyed and start being mean to people. And I get annoyed just because I'm reading the same thing 4 times. And that's not fair, so I take a little break. I was watching something where, like, a guy was talking to a bunch of different women, and he spoke to each one with a totally different set of words he was choosing, and almost with a totally different accent. It was hilarious. He was just switching based on what he thought that a person expected to hear. But authors do this to make sure that their audience, especially women and people of color, will do this to establish that while their character may be uneducated, they themselves are not. Right? They, as the author, are top-notch, very smart. And that's a power play on the part of the author. And we see it, again, from authors in times where only some people in their group had access to education. Okay? We also see it from Steinbeck. It was kind of a thing back in the day. All right. So the poor were sweaty and unpretty. And he's using the word Negroes, which is kind of ugly right now, but it was what was polite at the time. It's not polite now. Please, if you use it in your paper because you're quoting, please absolutely make sure every use of it is in quotation marks. It's outdated politeness, and it would not be considered polite now. Yes? Okay. But that is the polite, because, you know, he's fancy and he's going to, you know, but then things start getting dark, okay? Because what's happening? Can somebody say what's literally happening here? there are people coming toward him in rough ranks. There's a riot, and it's coming toward him. Okay. And he's getting panicky, right? Because he's about to get swept up in a riot. And it's what are people like in a riot? Anytime people have decided to riot, what's the mood?
Anger, rage.
Anger and rage. And so you've got a group of very angry and enraged people heading toward you, and you're frightened. But let's add to that his own racism probably created a fear there, even if they were just walking down the street peacefully. Am I right? Unfortunately, I am, I think. So they're coming toward him, and they're telling John Cabot, John, you are a desperate man, and the desperate die expensively today. What are they doing to this man? John Cabot, the fancy white man.
Trying to kill him.
Yeah. And he cried, and oh, Lord, this last line, it is really painful. Let's make sure we understand it. These are the last words of a racist person as he goes out, right? And he's supposedly paraphrasing who? Forgive them, they know not what they do. Who said that?
Jesus.
Right, so he's putting the words of Jesus in his mouth, but look how he's soiling that word with this ugly, ugly, insulting word, right? So even in his last, he's being ugly, right? And okay, and what does Gwendolyn Brooks start this poem with? A riot is the language of the unheard. Okay? This goes with the poem Harlem. In the poem Harlem, it talks about a dream deferred. What is that dream that has been deferred? I'm switching to Harlem a little bit. That's the one where he talks about a dream. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up and go away? Does it get rotten and start to stink? Or what does it? What's his last suggestion?
Does it explode?
Does it explode, right? And what happens when the dream deferred is equality? And it's deferred and deferred and deferred. What happens? Can you say that again, Portia? We didn't hear it.
Well, I was trying to say people become disgruntled, and it leads to riot, to civil war, and other stuff.
They explode. Right, they explode. I think his last suggestion is what he's probably thinking might happen. And so Gwendolyn Brooks is talking about this too. Like, look, there's only so much we can put up with before things explode. Now, this is a rough poem. It's rough in terms of thinking about Martin Luther King and his message, and then this riot that's very violent. Martin Luther King wanted to achieve his goals through what means? Peaceful protest. And she's using him right at the top. Somebody who advocated for peaceful protest, right? Very much like the forgive them, they know that not what they do person, advocating for peaceful change and changing people's hearts. But what are the people in the poem doing? They're following more the Malcolm X by any means necessary model, yes? Right. And then in the last line you see that the white man is doing this too. He supposedly follows this peaceful person, but in the end he can't. He can't keep that violent word out of his mouth. Right? And the word is violence. Right? His last word is his last violence to the people in the riot. Right? This is rough. Some people don't want to deal with the anger of a riot. Some people don't want to deal with the anger they feel about the way they've been treated historically, right? It's a powerful poem. We don't have to like it, but do we understand it now? Okay. Does anybody still not understand it, or is there confusion about it still, pieces of it that you want to ask about? I will share it again with you so that you can ask about pieces that confuse you if you're still confused. Does anybody want to speak about why they don't like it? I think that's important. Can we hear from you about why you don't like it? Mine should not be the only voice in this conversation. Why didn't you like it?
We're talking about Riot, correct?
Yes. Why did you dislike it?
Oh, I enjoyed it. It was just that we just didn't really understand it. But now that you explained it, it was a good one. It's harsh. It's kind of like Brown Girl did, where it's hard. It's harsh, but it's still a good one.
It is harsh. And again, I think it would be pretty lame, though, to look back at African American authors from the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s and only choose their cheerful poems. Yeah. That seems just lame, right? It seems to be kind of a whitewashing of what they were really writing about, and kind of irresponsible. Yeah. On the same time, I'm not here to, inflict trauma on everybody. Anybody else who really did not like it? Or still does not like it? I'd love to hear from you. It is dark. All right. Let's talk about the poor for a minute. Let's get there, because we had some people who didn't care for that or were confused by it, and then others who didn't understand it. This one's a simple one. This is by William Carlos Williams. That's Broken Windows. Okay. This is from the poor. It's from his book, Broken Windows. By constantly tormenting them with reminders of the lice in their children's hair, the school physician first brought their hatred down on him. But by this familiarity, they grew used to him, and so, at last, took him for their friend and advisor. Now, let's keep in mind that the author was a doctor, okay? William Carlos Williams was a doctor, and he was a doctor through the flu pandemic of 1919. You remember the one that everybody keeps talking about, the Spanish flu pandemic that killed 6 million Americans that everybody keeps comparing COVID to? He was a doctor through that pandemic. So a lot of his work is about doctoring. A lot of it's about death. This one I picked because it's talking about a theme that appears in some of our other poems, which is poverty. He's the school physician. He's the school doctor. And he's nagging them to clean their kids' hair and to try to get rid of the lice, which is really next to impossible to do without today's medications and laundry detergents, etc., right? It's hard to get rid of. This is hilarious. Has anybody here ever dealt with an outbreak of lice, either with their kid or with a sibling, or have you all escaped unscathed from the lice? Have you watched your friends get sent home to deal with head lice? Oh, it's awful. Did you guys we used to get checked. They used to check our heads in school all the time. Did y'all get checked for lice all the time? They take 2 pencils and they look through your hair. Does anybody remember that? No? Oh, maybe they're not doing it anymore. That would be good. It's making me itchy just to think about it. What are lice?
I don't really know how to explain what they is, but I know they in your head though.
They're little bugs in your head.
Yeah, like
The
bugs.
the little white bugs.
Little white bugs in your hair. It's really making me itchy. Like, yeah, and they stick to the roots of your hair, and they lay eggs in the roots of your hair. And how do they spread? They spread. What's that, Portia?
Like I said, sexual contact. People using the same like combs and other things.
Yes, so by physical contact, so wearing somebody else's headband, wearing somebody else's hat, sleeping on somebody else's pillowcase, putting on a full head mask in a store. Y'all, please don't do that. It's so gross. Like, I see people going in and putting those costume heads on their heads in a store, and I'm like, no, don't do that. You're going to get lice. Sharing combs and brushes and things like that. Why are they so hard to get rid of?
Probably because they're so small. They lay eggs.
They're small and they lay eggs, and then the eggs get on the pillowcases, and unless you clean everything that ever touched this person's hair, those eggs can hatch and start a new batch. So it's really awful. Every time there's been, like, I remember my kid in preschool, there was a lice outbreak, and I was like, oh, please spare us. Please spare us the lice outbreak. And we sidestepped it, but, we were checking her head every night. All right, so how does somebody earn a group of people's trust by nagging them about hygiene? Because he figures out that they care, right? I mean, when you stick around and continue to help a group of people, they may not like you at first, but they get to like you as you continue to help them and show them that you're on their side and that you want the best for them, right? I very often have students who will come to me at the beginning of the semester fully expecting me to be a jerk to them. Because they've had teachers be jerks to them in the past, and they kind of come in guns blazing. I turned this in late and it's still a 0. Why is it still a 0? And it's like, well, because I won't go over late work until next week, but I got your back. And they're like, oh, sorry I yelled at you, right? But they've had people be jerks to them before. They're expecting it. And I think this is kind of what William Carlos Williams is talking about in The Poor, is that that these people are just kind of regular people, and he's kind of a fancier guy, and he's expecting them to be, they're expecting him to be condescending and kind of mean and kind of a jerk. And when he turns out to just want what's best for them and trying to help them, he wins their fate. He wins a little trust. Yeah? Okay. Don't put race in this one. William Carlos Williams is a white dude. All right. And probably working with white patients in a poor white community. There are poor white communities and always will be. All right. People, I'm going to let you all tell me which one we do next. Do we deal with, some people liked Saturday's Child, some people hated it. Should we talk about that briefly and then move on? It's a good poem. Who wants to tell us why they either liked it or disliked it? Okay, we'll talk about something else. All right. Also on the list of things that we disliked was Elegy for Jane. And I want to talk about that one for a second. I'm going to see if I can make this at all bigger. I can. Awesome. Why did we dislike Elegy for Jane?
I didn't understand it.
Okay, that's fair, when we don't understand something. So, Theodore Roethke was a poet and a professor, and he's writing this to who? Who is Jane?
They get thrown by a horse.
Yeah.
Student.
He's writing it to his student who was thrown by a horse, and he has this description of her that's a very loving, almost uncomfortably loving description of her, and that puts us off guard a little bit. But he misses her, and I think the thing that really sums up, over this damp grave I speak the words of my love, I with no rights in this matter, neither father nor lover. He's just your teacher, right? And this may be a poem you can't connect to, right? He's made this connection. He's somebody who has, I'm going to stop this share so we can see each other. He's somebody who has made a real connection with his students. These are students that he's teaching, probably graduate students where you work with somebody for years at a time working on a thesis and in seminars. So he probably knew her very well and worked with her one-on-one and in small groups for more than one semester, for a year or even 2 years as a graduate student. Does that help you understand the intimacy here a little bit? Okay. So painting that picture of what kind of teaching and studenting they were doing helps fill that in a little bit. But I also want to kind of talk to you about what it's like for a teacher when a student passes away. What do you think that would be like? Is it just nothing? Does it not hit on our radar?
To like have a relationship with your teacher?
No, to have your thing. Put yourself in the position of the teacher, and one of your students has passed away. What's that
I
like?
think it's gonna be hard because over the months and stuff y'all was together, the relationship y'all built is hard once that pass.
Yeah, and yeah, Corey.
I add to that because my mama a teacher, and she always would say like, when you were at school with me, I'm your mama. So,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I guess like seeing the same. Well, she teach first grade, so
Oh yeah, those
like,
are her babies.
seeing these same kids every day, you somewhat build this bond with them.
Yeah.
So you really do feel like they're your kids too.
Yeah.
So that would be hard when
Yes.
I'm dying and it feel like one of yours has died too. Like your real children has died.
Yeah. And I've visited my students in the hospital. I've visited, I've gone to their funerals, and it's heartbreaking. And yet you don't, this last line is really important because you're nobody here. You're not part of the family. You're not their friend. You don't have any right to be grief-stricken. And yet you are, right? And you go there. I think this relationship happens sometimes with oncology nurses, the nurses who are there to give somebody their chemo treatments over and over again, month after month after month, or week after week, if it's every week. They build a relationship with their patient, and then if their patient doesn't make it, they're heartbroken. I remember meeting my friend's nurse at her funeral, and she was heartbroken. You know, when you are in a job that builds relationships, you're this outsider, but you care so much. Portia.
Okay, now I want to say could also be that like all the impartation, like the studies, inside the relationship, everything they imparted into that person, they were not able to realize it and they just died. They be that way too. They didn't realize their dreams and
It's heartbreaking. Yeah, it is. So everybody here needs to stay healthy. Please.
I wouldn't call it being an outsider. I would just say, because like I feel like the only person who would really be an outsider too, are like people like his family or so. But like if you're a teacher and you have a certain relationship, like I feel like you will talk to your family about that teacher or about that nurse or something like that. So I don't really think you would be an outsider. You just wouldn't be like a immediate family.
And that's where we get to kind of a gender issue with this, is that if he's too broken up about it, everybody's going to raise an eyebrow, which is also kind of heartbreaking. Michaela, you're nodding. Why? Why would that raise an eyebrow?
from how close they is, they'll probably think something's going on between those two, most likely.
And that's really frustrating, isn't it? It is. My dad taught elementary school for 36 years. And at one point, he was taking a walk, and he was near the playground in town, and he sat down and was just kind of sketching. But he was just sketching stuff in the park, but he missed the sound of kids playing that he used to hear at recess every day. So he sat down to listen to it. And, somebody came over and told him if he didn't have a kid in the park, he should leave. Because they didn't know him. They didn't know him as the retired school teacher and the grandfather. They saw him as a creepy old man in the park. And it was heartbreaking for him. It was heartbreaking. Right? And there's this extra burden that men carry of trying to walk around the world reassuring everybody they're not creepy. And it's kind of unfair. It's kind of unfair because, most men are fine. Most men are nice guys who are not creeping, right? Or being inappropriate. They care, they love other people, they're just human beings, and it's a burden, right? And I think that creeps in here a little bit. Of I can't show how much I'm grieving because it would be inappropriate. And there's a little of that creeping into his mourning as well. Does that make sense? There's a lot of depth here. All right. You don't have to like it, but again, I hope I've helped you understand it a little bit. Who disliked Harlem? And why? Let's talk about this. I like talking about the ones you don't like. I'm so mean. Why did we dislike Harlem? Somebody speak. Is it because the rhythm was off kilter? Or because you didn't get it? Or because you just didn't like it? Oh, poor boo.
I like off-kilter poetry, me personally. I don't like it when it rhymes, because it kind of feels like a lot of the author puts a lot more effort into the rhyme than the meaning of the poem.
And yeah, I often get frustrated when there's a rhyme but it's off-kilter, and it's not with the rhythm. Why is he using these rhymes and this weird rhythm? Does anybody have any sense of what music genre he's trying to sound like?
Wasn't that jazz?
Yeah, that's right. He's trying to sound like 1940s jazz, which had very off-kilter rhythms. They were asynchronous rhythms, right? So there was a syncopation where something would happen just after the beat or just, or ahead of the next beat. And so it was intended to be, I keep saying off-kilter, but that's the best way I can describe it. It's intended to be arrhythmic, and yet still have a rhythm underneath it, which this does. This comes back to a rhythm in a couple of places, but then it trips you up and breaks the rhythm. And that's very much mimicking a form of jazz actually called, trying to make sure, so this is mimicking the bebop form of jazz, which is, often instrumental. But Louis Armstrong would do it when he would start doing scat, where he would start saying the notes with his voice. And that's really fun, but it is kind of intentionally arrhythmic. So he's trying to make it sound a bit like that. Okay, does that help you understand the form of it? Okay. Incident was one of the poems people said they liked. Do you want to discuss it? Okay, if you want to discuss this absolutely needs to be a student-led discussion. Because this is about the use of a word that should never cross my lips. So, I'm going to open it, and I'm going to let y'all talk about it. what's in this? Why do we like it? Let me make sure it's not going to play for us here. Is this one just going to be obnoxious to us? Incident. Yeah, I'm going to find a different copy. Hang on. All right. I'm going to go ahead and bring this version up. Somebody tell me what this poem is about, summarizing it in your own words. You do not have to discuss it if you don't want to. You can even step away for a moment if you really don't want to deal with it. But if you are interested in talking about it, tell me what this is about.
Wasn't it about, he was 8 years old going to Baltimore, I guess, and he got called a racial slur for the first time?
Yeah, by whom?
Another
child.
kid.
Another little kid. And what does he say the impact of that was on him?
It was hard because that's the only thing he remembered.
Right, he was there from May until December. Yeah. And what does he say at the end?
That's
all the things
That's
that
all he remembers.
That's all he remembers. Why would that push all of the other memories out of your head?
Because, I feel like it's human society, really, like humans, how we think, we only put a lot of energy on bad things instead of the good stuff. So, that is very emotional, but, especially for a little kid, you know what I'm saying? Especially 8, because 8's kind of like that age where you're starting to come up yourself, and then for another 8-year-old kid just to, I guess, dumb you down would hurt.
Yeah, and it predicts a whole lifetime of hatred from that young kid. They're going to grow up and use that hatred their whole life long, which is part of what's so disturbing about it, is that kid is being taught that word that young, and being taught that attitude that young. That's rough, right? Every once in a while, when I was traveling on an airplane, I would run into some old codger dude who would sit beside me and tell me that women should stay at home and have babies and shouldn't have jobs, and et cetera, et cetera. And when I was trying not to put him in his place or be rude to him, I would think to myself, well, pretty soon he'll die and his attitude will die with him. Which is probably not a great thing to think, but it was a way of coping. When somebody young starts saying that, you don't have that out. You don't have this, okay, but this is an old attitude and it'll die out soon. Right? You see a rebirth of that problem when a young person expresses that kind of disrespect and denigration toward another person. And that's what's, I don't know, that's what strikes me as so awful about this. It also reminds us that words have a really big power, right? Words are really powerful. They hurt, right? And they're hard to forget when somebody chucks a bad one at you. Yeah? Monisha, I see you nodding a lot. What are you thinking? Talk to me. Have a voice here.
I personally, I like the poem because I did grow up in an all-white school system. So, that wasn't new to me at all, racism and stuff like that. So, it was just another thing to me when I read it and stuff.
Well, that makes me sad because this was from, the early 1900s and we're still dealing with it. Yeah. I'm sorry about that. I hate that for you. I'm glad you got to get some company and sympathy from a poem at least. Yep. Anybody just... Yeah, go ahead, Corian.
I can say, too, now that she said that, I had, a lot of people consider it like a mostly white school. And I done heard times that they said that word. I mean, they said it to my friend before, but never said it to me. I don't know because they were scared to say it to me. But I don't know. It still go on now. Like outside of school, at school, no matter that. It's still people out here who stand on it, saying that word to tell down.
That's the tragedy of this poem, is that it's not as outdated as it should be.
Yeah. I mean, I've dealt with it too, but I guess my approach is kind of different because I just don't care, you know. Because a lot of, like, you know, my mom, I used to mess with my brother. You know, she was like, if in order for him to stop messing with you, just ignore him. You know what I'm saying? Because I feel like if they say the word and you give them that energy back, they have space to become a victim. You know what I'm saying? Like, he attacked me, boom, or he said this and this to me. And then they'll just ignore the fact that, you know, they instigated the entire situation. Mm-hmm. Where if you just ignore it, then you can't blame anybody else.
Yeah. There's a literary trope from the Harlem Renaissance when these folks are writing of a mirror moment, where in a lot of these pieces, the person sees themselves as an African American for the first time. It's the first time they saw themselves through the filter of other people's racism, in other words. And that's kind of what's going on here, is this poor little kid is like, wait, I thought I was just a person. And now you called me this name, and it just disrupted everything in my brain, because now I have to grapple with this other concept of myself that I never had before. That naming of somebody as a thing is abusive in a very special way, because especially when that person is really young. I mean, think about the insults that might be thrown at a little kid that change the way they see themselves, right? This is something where he's going, wait, I just thought I was a kid. And somebody over here hates me for no reason and is calling me names just because they think they can. And it's a foundational shift of how you walk through the world after that sometimes. Sometimes not. You can let it roll off your back. But I have a friend who was called an ugly duckling as a little kid who still feels ugly because of it, right? They were trying to tell her she'd be beautiful when she got through her awkward phase, but what they told her was she was ugly. Be careful what you say to people, yeah? Yeah. All right. We are at the end of our time. I want to point you to a couple of things that I need you to do to educate yourselves. And I'm going to make sure that I talk about this. I'm going to open this poetry close reading paragraph draft and talk about this model, even though it's putting us a little over our time. Okay? The first thing we have is a topic sentence. After that, we have a couple of sentences talking just about what the poem is about. We give the title in one sentence and we capitalize it and put it in quotation marks. Then we have another sentence introducing the author. Okay? Then you have a little summary of anything you might know about it again and what the poem is about. Okay? Then we quote it, and we quote it more than once, and each time we quote it, we use an introductory phrase. The speaker admits he is, comma, quote. We put slashes for the line breaks. So every time there's a line break, you put in a slash. And then at the end of your sentence, even if your sentence continues after the quote, at the end of your sentence, you quote the line numbers in parentheses with a lowercase LINES space 1 through 3 or 1 through 4 or 1 through 2 if you're quoting multiple lines. If it's a single line, it would just say line 3. Okay? And then after that, we analyze what you want your reader to understand about the line that you just quoted. Not paraphrasing it, right? But adding to it and analyzing it. And then we quote it at least 2 or 3 times. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 quotes from that poem, and then I end with my own analysis of what's important about it. All right? Now, there are 2 videos here that walk you through this nice and slow. One is the using quotes video tutorial that goes over this using quotes handout. If you can, print the handout while you listen to the tutorial. Okay, it's going over the handout. It would be better for you to read this handout out loud than to do anything else. Reading this out loud to yourself would be better than anything else, and then watch that tutorial. There's an extra tutorial about quoting poetry specifically. Please don't skip this assignment. You might flunk it and need to do it again. That's a weird thing to say, but quoting and citing is hard. You might have learned it differently in your 101. Your 101 might have been a long time ago. I might be being really picky, right? But I want you to make yours look like the model. The model was this big. Yours should be that big. The model used 3 or 4 quotes. You should use 3 or 4 quotes. The model used citations every time. You should use citations every time. Print that model out if you need to. Copy and paste it into a document. Have that one above yours. Make sure yours looks like that one. Okay? I want you in the end, when you're about to turn this in, to do that little find the differences thing, and I want there to not be very many. If my poem title is in quotations and capitalized, yours should be too. If I introduce the poem and the author in separate sentences before I quote from it, you should too. Okay? Does that make sense? Watch the videos. You're going to need them. We needed to make sure you understood the poems before you had to write about them, right? But that coaching on how to do a close reading is in there for you. Please don't skip class by skipping those videos. Yes? All right. Stay on if you need to.